Welcome back to the Chad Hasty Show. News Talk 95.1 FM and 790 AM KFYO. We continue. We've been doing this over the last few weeks, taking a little bit of time visiting with our local lawmakers and taking a look back on the Texas legislative session. We've given them a little bit of time to get out of the Austin funk and relax a little bit. And Texas State Senator Charles Perry joins us this morning. Are you glad not to be in Austin?
It's a good day anytime you're not in Austin. That is a fair statement.
How are you today?
You know, it's a good day. It's a good day to be home. Good day to be back in Lubbock. There's kind of a letdown. You get down there and you're going through the adrenaline and all the things that you're doing and trying to get accomplished in a short amount of time. And it takes a little time to decompress, and it takes, and then you walk back to a practice. Dustin is a practicing attorney. I'm a practicing CPA, and John's a business owner of a printing press. And so we all three walk back in, and we don't get that break. I was 5 hours in depositions on some expert testimony 2 days after session. So, it just seems like the grind is pretty intense for a while. And then you start having the meetings, you're glad to do them and want to do them, and calendars start filling up. So it's still busy. I've been back in Austin over some water interim charges that I'm working on and some healthcare stuff. So it's not slowed down, but it's good to be home. I told somebody, I said, what does your vacation look like? I said, well, if I could just sleep in the same bed for more than 3 nights at a time and not be back and forth between Austin and Lubbock, I consider that a good day, a good week. So that's kind of where I'm at, catching up on all the rest.
Well, let's talk about one of the big stories of the session, at least for out here, and something that happened earlier this week. The Texas Tech Vet School is it's happening. It's on. We got funding for it, and you and our local lawmakers are to thank for that.
Yeah, it was a priority for 2 sessions for sure on the funding side. We got the beginnings of it last session and followed through, and the policy stood on its own. I tell people I trust the process. If I can't trust the process, I shouldn't go down. And the policy was right, and the legislature recognized it, and relationships being what they were, we had the right mix of people. Timing was right, and we got that thing funded. There was a little bit of a blip in the paper that it's not a done deal. There's some formalities to work through on the Higher Ed Coordinating Board. Their job is to make sure the curriculum meets the accreditation standards that the AVM will put out. But for all intents and practical purposes, we'll have a vet school with the first class starting in 2021.
And one of the things that I kept hearing when I would go down and do the show in Austin and visiting with lawmakers, on the air, off the air, one of the things that they would tell me is that we're glad we're doing this behind the scenes. We're glad this isn't out in front of the public. Was that you think? I mean, obviously that was a good strategy, but was that a strategy not to have the big headlines and not to get, I guess, into a big fight with Texas A&M?
Yeah, there wasn't any reason to engage on the political front. I'll go back to my first statement. The policy was right, and you have to work off of policy and not emotion. There was obviously a lot of politics that had led into the sessions, 2 previous sessions. There was a lot of rancor, and there was poking the demon, so to speak, or poking the giant, I guess. But at the end of the day, it was always about the policy to me. It was always about making sure that everybody understood the policy, the need, and the purpose. And if you stay on that ground and you win, and you typically will, then that's the right path. That's the high road. So we my colleagues and I understood very clearly how to get it over the finish line, and when we stood true to that.
Yeah. Visiting with Texas State Senator Charles Perry here on the Chad Hasty Show. How do you think overall, how did this session go?
Session was good. We addressed a lot of different issues. I know there's a big discussion about spending a lot of money, but I remind people a $251 billion budget is the biggest one we've ever had, absolutely, $250 billion of spending. But when it's not there, guess what? Texas don't spend. They don't print money. They don't go borrow money. Mm-hmm. They just reduce budgets. So we had to catch up on numerous issues. Number one, people don't recognize or realize it. The rainy day drawdown, about $4.9 billion of that was related to Harvey impact. Hopefully some of that will be reimbursable as the feds get their act together over the next 6 to 10 years. But we had to deal with some Harvey-related matters. We were fortunate to have a savings account. A good chunk of that was all Harvey-related. Inside the budget, we've got a $5 billion buy-down of property taxes. We got a $6.3 billion influx into public school finance, which is actually part of buying down property taxes in the Robin Hood arena. So roughly $11 billion, $10 billion of the money inside the budget was fixing long-term carryovers of issues that we had punted on. We had let the courts decide in the past, and we decided at this point in time, we were fortunate to have a budget to support those initiatives, that we were going to deal with them head on, and we did a pretty good job. There was wiggle room. I tell people, and I'm hearing it already. We actually projected that we'd start hearing it, but it's property tax reform and not relief. But here's the challenge: we spent $5 billion, and you're going to get $100 on average, whatever, $150 off your property taxes. But going forward, you will have an active role in your property tax debate at the local jurisdiction. Going forward, there's a 3.5% on your counties, cities. There's 2.5% on your schools. That if they want to go above that, they're going to have a conversation with you. Those are big moves, and it puts the power back into where it needs to be, and that's the voter and the taxpayer and the person. So, but when you spend $5 billion and you only really get a $100 kicker, that tells you we have a very efficient tax system, and by that I mean the diversity of how we gain government revenue is so diverse, in that it's split across so many different ways to get there that it takes mountains to move it very much either way. So that's kind of the internal workings of why we can't really buy down $5,000 on your property tax bill this year, is because we need $30 billion more dollars in the budget. So it's a swap. I mean, our property tax system is self-leveling. If it's up on the local, the states go down, vice versa. So you don't get the option of just having a direct dollar come in and just say we're going to wipe away 40% of your taxes.
So what happens? And I'm sure you've heard it already. We've talked about it on the show. When this session started, we kept on hearing property tax relief. It changed into reform. We're reforming the system. There's a little bit of relief, and the reform is great. There are a lot of taxpayers out there and a lot of property owners, and you're probably one of them as well, who go, my property tax bill is still too dang high. $100 is nice, but it's still really high. How do we get true relief? So we're going to have to make a conversation or a discussion, I guess. So first of all, the messaging wasn't right, partly because the math wasn't done before the message. You know what I mean? Yeah. We're all talking about property tax reform and relief. And until you get in a budget session and understand how many dollars you have to play with, that relief component is kind of it's out there, because how much does it take to buy down? Well, it takes a lot of money to have very little impact. So we were poorly suited to be talking in those terms of relief until the budget came through. Real relief is to move away from property taxes, right? Yeah. The problem with that is, in order to get rid of just the maintenance and operation portion of our school districts only, not your counties and cities, if we just said, let's just get rid of that. The last math I had done and had the studies done, and there's one done every year, it would be close to 18 cents in sales tax. An extra, or? No,
an additional 12, because we're 6 1/4 as a state right now. So you'd be at 18 1/4 roughly. If you take away the exemptions that people very seldom recognize, you get exemptions on utilities, you get exemptions on medical, you get exemptions on ag, you get exemption on input costs for other things that we all live and need. It's about 11 cents. So you'd increase it another 5. Well, then we become instantly non-competitive with retailers contiguous to the state, and now with Amazon, obviously, right. People will really say, I wasn't paying any Amazon tax. Now with Wayfair I am, but I'll pay that 5 1/4 from wherever. Yeah. So it's really, I think, locked in where it's going to be for a while, until people come to the mindset that either we're just not going to fund certain aspects of government, and that's another debate to have. Are we funding too much? I always welcome the conversation. 92% of our budget is set before we ever show up. Yeah. That's roads, $32 billion. That's Health and Human Services at $67 billion in Medicaid, but it goes to about $85 billion in total budget for that. Public and higher eds are going to run roughly around $85 billion. And so out of 3 issues, and then you throw in corrections of about $6 billion, we're not talking about a lot of other, quote, discretionary spending that most people would be willing to give up right. that would have an impact on property taxes. So that's that's kind of the debate of the day.
You know, the sales tax swap, it was brought up, and I thought it wasn't rolled out that well, and it seemed there was fighting from, obviously from the Democrats who were against it. There were some Republicans who were for it. Obviously, the big three were for it, but there were a lot of Republicans who said, no, we're not for this at all. Do you think this idea of a sales tax swap, is it dead for now, or is it going to come back up in the next session?
It's going to come back up for different reasons. So there was 3 issues working on that in my mind. Number one, that was a huge policy move and shift that had not been studied. Interim charges.
It was in the middle of the session.
It was kind of like we showed up one day in the big 3 on news saying, "No, we're going to push a 1-cent sales tax."
Well, I remember they announced it the night before I had you on the show.
Yeah.
And or it started leaking the night before I had you on the show, and you're like,
"Yeah, news to everybody."
To everyone.
So not to be disrespectful of their ability to, or desire to fix things. I mean, I think they were truly in looking at the math, going, "We really want some big time property tax relief, so we're going to have to do this." So all that to say is that was one. It wasn't vetted, it wasn't tested, and nobody was ready for that kind of deal because it's a big move. Secondly, we're at a $251 billion budget, right? Most revenue we've ever had. So it's really hard, I think, to politically, just a political debate would be, why did you need an extra $5 billion when you've got more than you've ever had? But here's my policy. I try to look at the policy of it. In that $251 billion, we really have only one discretionary tool revenue-wise as a state legislature, and that's sales tax. That's all we really get to control, where it goes, how it goes, what we're going to do with it. Can we raise it? That is very much the last tool in the toolbox to manage our budget as a state. So at a time, number one, when we didn't actually need it, it wasn't like, gosh, we've got a depression and we got to have some money to fund just the basic, just textile or whatever.
Yeah.
It didn't make sense to use that tool, in my opinion. The 1 cent would have been lost forever. And I do project somewhere in the future, maybe in the next 10 years, whatever, we got a lot of moving parts in our budget, that may become one of those things we need. So I'm glad we didn't spend it just on that policy level.
Let's go ahead and take our break. When we come back, we have much more to get into with Texas State Senator Charles Perry here on the Chad Hasty Show. Chad Hasty Show, News Talk KFYO. We have Texas State Senator Charles Perry in studio going over this last legislative session. Senator, we had a texter here. You were talking about the budget, and they said, how about cutting agencies like TDA, TDLR, TCEQ, and TPWD?
We always get that question, Can we do with less agency? And I think the answer is probably we can do with less. I don't know that we can do with all agencies. TDA is the face of Texas agriculture around the world. They market Texas products. Go Texan brand is actually something that means something, and it garners more money for that. So, there's a lot of things that these agencies do that most people on the street wouldn't have any consideration. I'll use Parks and Wildlife. The complexities of managing a bay with all kinds of influences from artificial influences coming into those waters to keep an oyster bed alive, which then produces shrimp beds, which then produces economic, it's just amazing me the science behind a lot of these people's departments. Yeah. TDLR, we routinely go through every one of those licenses and see is it needed. We got rid of a shampoo license or something, I think, a couple of sessions ago. Those are driven by the associations, to be truthful. We just came through one, Plumbers, right?
Yeah.
So the associations, these industry groups that require these licenses, and some of it's public safety related. You don't want a child pedophile being able to come into your home and deliver plumbing services. That's why you have an agency that manages background checks and keeps that straight. So there's just different aspects of these licenses. Can we do without them? I'm sure we could. Would that put public safety in jeopardy? I think on some level in today's times you'd have to acknowledge that background checks on most people that are going to be coming into your home to do services is a good thing. So I understand people's perspective. I tell everybody I used to be a real big rock thrower, but now that I'm catching some of those rocks and understand the policy behind some of those agencies and what they really do that's behind the scenes that nobody knows, there's a valid purpose for them, but can we keep them in check, and do we need to consistently keep them reminded that they have a mission and don't let it creep? That is true.
Speaking of the Plumbers Board, the governor did an executive order,
right,
saving the Plumbers Board and keeping plumbers licensed in Texas. What did you think how that played out? Was it a good move to do the executive order? Are you glad that board was saved?
Well, I think the public safety aspect comes into that. Again, it goes back to background checks for people in your home. It goes back to people that handle gas, people that if they don't know what they're doing and they get raw sewage backed up into the city municipal service, and now you're out of water in your system for a week. So is there a valid need for a licensing oversight to make sure people that are doing that job are qualified? Absolutely. It's Sunset 101. Every session we have a sunset bill. And almost inevitably, every session we have a sunset bill that didn't get passed, that either by virtue of process, somebody wasn't paying attention and it missed the deadlines, and they're very, very strict. Sunset's a whole different pathway through the legislature intentionally, and it's one of those areas that you can actually have a special session call back, i.e. last time we had a special session call back because we didn't get the medical licenses redone. The politics get involved on sunset legislation, and it's usually held hostage to get other things done by members that are in position to do that. I don't know what the background on the plumber's license get passed. I really don't. My governor is a good guy, and he does a good job. I do share concerns that as more power is transferred from legislative branch to executive branch, or for that matter to regulatory branches, agencies specifically as the previous texture, we've got to be very careful as we go through that, because you should never do it based on the personality of the office today, that they're responsible people. You don't know what the next one may be like. So,
right.
And our fathers were pretty brilliant in setting it up. So I don't fault the governor for not wanting to call us back. That's expensive. It's about $1 million to have us go back down there for a session, special session. So it adds up real fast. So the fact that he could do it and did it, I'm good with the fact that, because we did need that oversight role for people that are involved in very serious infrastructure needs of the public.
Does there need to be a change in the future of how sunset bills are considered?
Absolutely. I don't have the history of why sunset has taken on this life. They call them Christmas trees in the legislature, because almost inevitably everybody's bill that didn't get passed that they wanted passed, the sunset legislation is broad enough that you can hang things on it, and that's why they typically die. But I wish and I hope that we will review how legislation, because that would be the first one on the books. If I was one of those guys running the ship, I'd say let's get our sunsets done first week of the session, because most of them are done over the interim.
Yeah. When we come back, we're going to continue our visit with Texas State Senator Charles Perry. We've got a few more things to get to, including we're going to find out which bill or bills that did not get a lot of spotlight, needed to get a lot of spotlight, and some of his favorite bills that were passed. Chad Hasty Show, KFYO. Chad Hasty Show, News Talk, KFYO. We'll have this one more segment with Texas State Senator Charles Perry here in studio. Before I get to some other legislation that's out there, and this is something that the Lieutenant Governor has been asked about, that others have been asked about. There's always the folks kind of like me who, take a look back at the session and go, okay, let's digest this all. Let's talk about it. How did lawmakers do? There are some conservative groups and others who are saying that this was a bad session, a liberal, purple session, whatever you want to call it. I sort of called it the do no harm session of the year. Do you disagree with those who say that it was a purple session or not a good session for conservatives?
So the answer to that is you got to look at it kind of from all of those perspectives. Some say we spent too much money. We spend the money that the budget gives us in Texas, always have, always will, and we had a backlog of needs, and we're fortunate to have extra money to deal with some of those. So on the money issue, we were very conservative in that we addressed some backlog of deferred maintenance. We had a Harvey event that you cannot ever predict. So on the fiscal side, we spent a lot of money. But remember, and I always ask my colleagues that are griping at me about that, did we raise your taxes? And how many times have we raised your taxes since 2003 when Republican Congress led Senate and chambers and legislature came into being? So until I raise your taxes and I'm spending within the means of the state budget according to the guidelines we have to operate under to meet the needs that we've been told we need to do, I don't know that the fiscal argument holds a lot of truth.
Yeah.
The conservative agenda, there were some things done that were not publicly real public. We put more money into pregnancy abortion alternatives. So a Park Ridge Pregnancy Center, if you will, a McGladney Adoption Center, those people got more funding this session and nobody knew about it. I want to say in excess of $30 million of additional money. And so we're always looking for ways to provide alternatives to abortion, people that are in that situation, trying to make a decision. Now we've got more resources to where we may have parents or mentors or people to help those single moms coming up with those decisions to make the right decision and keep that baby. So we did some of that behind the scenes. That's a budget issue. You didn't see it in a big bill. Chick-fil-A bill obviously was probably the most social recognized bill. I had on the floor Senate Bill 17. It was about religious liberty regarding state licensure. You know, the big debate is if you're requiring a state licensing agency, if someone from the state has to approve your license, can you really lose your ability to practice your faith because you are now working under a state licensure? Mm-hmm. And at Senate Bill 17, all it did was gave a defense that I am exercising my religion if you want to come after my license. Today, it goes through an administrative hearing typically. Those are political appointees. What Senate Bill 17 would have done is push that to the judiciary system, would have better tools to evaluate religious freedom. It didn't get passed, and I was kind of disappointed that we didn't have that because you see it play out every day where people of faith are challenged on their faith in their work environments. And then when you're a state-sponsored discriminatory, it's funny, the argument is always the counter. They're arguing that I was discriminating against those that are looking for service, and I was arguing that the state was discriminatory and not allowing me to practice my faith in the commission of that service. So it was a tough bill. But not a lot of social agendas in it because you had property tax reform, you had school finance reform, you have Harvey relief reform. So those big areas. You know, I told somebody going in session, it's going to be a very narrow scope of items, but very, very, very big items. And that's exactly how it played out. Yeah. Very, very limited on focus, but very large dollar and policy moves.
What are a few of the bills maybe that you did get passed that did not make headlines? Everyone was focused on those major pieces that people need to know about.
I had a reporter that jots down everything you tell him going into the session you want to see get done. And he called me the other day and said, well, you ran the lottery. I don't know that I've had as good a session as this on legislation passed, and a lot of it is rural. So, first of all, the vet school, obviously. Secondly, rural health care funding. We have been challenged. I have 39 rural health care clinics in my 51 counties that provide rural access to health care. One of them actually closed during the session because of lack of funding. Going forward, now the state is required to pay Medicaid cost. So whatever it costs under the Medicaid system, they're going to get paid on. An additional $100 million goes to rural health care now because of that Senate bill. MDCP, very much under the radar unless you've got special needs kids that are very, very challenged. These are kids that are on ventilators, that may live in a wheelchair, that parents stay up 24/7 with to make sure their lungs don't collapse because they've got mucus building in them. We needed some significant reforms in the MCO process to make their lives better. Massive overhaul of administrative reforms. Not a lot of money. We're going to review that as we go through, but those kids' lives are better today. Hemp. That was a big discussion coming in. We'd worked on it in the prior session. Federal Farm Bureau put it into play. Texas now is going to be able to grow hemp. That's going to be a big deal for agriculture community. It's a little bit less water. It is diverse. It doesn't have a natural enemy today. Over time they'll figure that. Pest will figure it out. But today we're going to have another money crop for ag producers to go, and they keep finding needs for that. I-27, very important to this area of the state, but it's got legs. Interesting enough, not a favorite, TxDOT really doesn't want to do it, if you really want to know the truth, because they've got all their boats loaded over on I-35. But since session, it's gotten momentum with the New Mexico governor getting involved, because a piece of it goes up over there to connect I-25. Big area for Laredo to Canada now. And I think we're going to see a faster progression of that, but it's still slow because it's interstate highway systems. But we're there. So just lots of little things. And then on the local level, we had 2 or 3 hospital deals get through that needed to get done. We had Dunbar High School, which required a bill to keep that doors open so that they'd have an opportunity to kind of salvage that system over there. And I think our administration, Zach Brady, president, and Kathy Rollo and those guys are doing a great job of making that come to fruition, but they needed a bill. So you have those. I'm guessing I'll have somewhere around 80 bills probably got through the governor's desk when it's all said and done. Yeah. And I know that most people say, did we need them? Well, there are 51 counties. There's always something that needs to be tweaked.
It's a big area.
It's a big area.
Yeah.
So, and it's really kind of crazy, some of the things we have to make statutes to clean up, but little stuff like that. But I'd have to name that MDCP, those fragile kids, the rural health care funding, and leaving clinics the ability to stay open. Obviously, the vet school and its effects. I-27 for the district, from the district perspective, it had a great session.
Yeah. Before I let you go, how did you end up at the bill signing for the property tax reform?
It was interesting. So they invite people. You're typically invited anytime. You may not be at the table. Yeah. Obviously, they like people to show up. I was there for a water conference the next day. I was keynoting a water conference, and they had invited me, and I said, I really am not coming down just for the bill signing, but I said, since I'm going to be there the next day, I'll show up. And probably a couple hours before that, they said, "Can you be at the table with it?" I said, "Sure." I said, "I'd be glad to." So it was just kind of short straw, I guess, if you look at it, or luck of the draw.
Lubbock well represented.
It was
at the
really
table.
good.
Yeah.
And that was an interesting guy. I know you're running out of time, but that guy that we were at, that hamburger place, $8,000 increase in his property taxes from Austin.
Wow.
That year. And if you put that in perspective, if he makes $1 a burger, he would have to sell another 8,000 burgers in a year just to pay for his property taxes. That's real effect. And people just lose sight of, you're really affecting an individual and a business owner when you just tweak these little taxes here and there.
Yeah, absolutely. Texas State Senator Charles Perry, it's always good to have you in. You always do a great job down in Austin. We appreciate your time.
We had a good time. Thank you guys for having me on.